Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. In this episode of my podcast, I will be discussing the guardianship, or Shoghi Effendi. Bear in mind that anything I say in this episode is my own personal understanding. Indeed, whenever I personally talk about the Baha'i faith, that is to say, unless I am reading an authoritative Baha'i source, my own understanding is all that I am expressing. Nothing else, because I am only a fallible human being. I am not capable of understanding things on any other level than the stage of my personal development. So, bear in mind that I am only talking about me, not about the Baha'i faith in any kind of authoritative way. But what I want to do is to present a perspective on the guardianship. It is not a perspective I have heard presented anywhere else. Now, there are a number of reasons for that. One might be that what I am thinking is totally hogwash, and I am open to that possibility. Another might be that simply no one else has thought of it. No one else has taken this particular topic and reflected on it in the way that I have. That could be true too. But I still think it is an interesting possibility, however erroneous it might be, to share and to discuss and perhaps to consult upon with other members of the Baha'i faith and perhaps with others as well. So let me go ahead and read to you this passage, put my spectacles on, so you can make that determination for yourself. Divorced from the institution of the guardianship, the world order of Baha'u'llah would be mutilated and permanently deprived of that hereditary principle, which, as Abdu'l-Baha has written, has been invariably upheld by the law of God. In all the divine dispensations, he states, in a tablet addressed to a follower of the faith in Persia, the eldest son hath been given extraordinary distinctions. Even the station of prophethood hath been his birthright. Without such an institution, the integrity of the faith would be imperiled, and the stability of the entire fabric would be gravely endangered. Its prestige would suffer. The means required to enable it to take a long and uninterrupted view over a series of generations would be completely lacking, and the necessary guidance to define the sphere of the legislative action of its elected representatives would be totally withdrawn. Severed from the no less essential institution of the Universal House of Justice, the same system of the will of Abdu'l-Baha would be paralyzed in its action and would be powerless to fill in those gaps which the author of the Kitab-e-Aqdas, which is Baha'u'llah, has deliberately left in the body of his legislative and administrative ordinances. That is what I wanted to read, and so I will remove my spectacles and begin my speculations upon it. I have seen many people who are enemies of the Baha'i faith for one reason or another. Now, why someone would be an enemy of the Baha'i faith is beyond me, but that's not up to me to decide. There are some people who are enemies of the Baha'i faith, and their interpretation of that passage is one of their major justifications for it. And so many of these people refer to Baha'is as the guardianless Baha'is. Why? Because Shoghi Effendi died in 1957 without appointing a successor. And so I guess from their perspective, the Baha'i faith is now without a guardian. To my understanding, their view is incorrect. But again, that is only my own understanding. Please keep that in mind with everything that I say. I am not attacking or criticizing those who may hold to different views. I am only expressing the understandings that I have personally arrived at through long periods of reflection and meditation. At the time that the Guardian wrote that, in particular about the guardianship, he was not exactly an old man, but he was not a young man either. He would die in the following decade. And so it is conceivable that he could have had a son even after writing that statement. And that son could have been the next guardian of the Baha'i faith. But that seems to me to be somewhat unlikely, somewhat unlikely. I have often wondered why it is that apparently no one ever asked Shoghi Effendi about that. Why did no one ever come to him, even in the 1950s, as best I know anyway, and inquire, how is there going to be a new guardian since you have no children? You don't have a son who is eligible, or any son, to become the next guardian of the cause of God. But I suspect the reason is pretty obvious. It is a generational problem. I am looking at it from the perspective of my generation as a baby boomer. I was born in 1956. He was writing this in the 1940s. And so I grew up in a time of openness regarding those kinds of subjects. At the time when the Guardian was saying this, there was no real openness about it. People generally did not talk about those subjects. And so I can't imagine somebody broaching this topic with Abdul Baha, or especially with Shoghi Effendi, about what would happen if the Guardian has no children. And of course, the Guardian had no children. And so nobody asked him, nobody asked Abdul Baha in terms of what would happen in the future, because that was simply not a proper thing to discuss at the time. But as we know, in 1957, the Guardian passed away. There was no successor. There was nobody to follow the Guardian as the next Guardian. That was the end of living guardians. A very difficult time ensued for the hands of the cause of God in the Holy Land. They met and they discussed the issue, and they concluded that there was no way to appoint a second guardian, that the hands of the cause did not have that authority, and so that was the end of the living guardian. The last guardian and the first guardian would be Shoghi Effendi. When news of that got out to the Baha'i world community, there was understandable confusion. I was not around at that time. I mean, I was born in 1956, a year before that, but I was not a Baha'i then either. So I would not have been prepared to ask a question like that as a baby or a toddler. And so I don't know exactly what people were going through, since I was not one of them, but I can imagine it must have been a very testing time for the Baha'i world community to realize that Shoghi Effendi was going to be the last living guardian of the cause of God. Now, here is how I personally understand the issue. The fact that the Guardian could not appoint a successor meant one major thing. That one major thing was that he was still the Guardian. Till this day, and until such a point in time when some prophet may come and announce that something has changed, Shoghi Effendi will remain the guardian of the cause of God. The fact that Shoghi Effendi is living now in the world to come does not really matter. The only reason we, meaning people in this world, see this world and the next world as apart from one another is because of our senses. Our power of sensation is a veil which prevents us from directly observing the world to come. That is not an obstacle to my understanding that people have in the next world. And so, Shoghi Effendi was looking at this issue from the standpoint of his divine inspiration, recognizing that no, I will not have any kids, or most likely, I will not have any male kids, but that does not mean that there won't be a guardian. In other words, he was taking his own statement that he made in World Order Baha'u'llah, which I made to you, and literally applying it to his own situation. The World Order Baha'u'llah is not divorced from the guardianship merely because Shoghi Effendi as a man has died. Shoghi Effendi is still, as I see it, the guardian of the cause of God, and will remain that until some indeterminate time. And therefore, as the guardian of the cause of God, Shoghi Effendi is also the head of the House of Justice. So those two institutions, the guardianship and the Universal House of Justice, still exist. We are not the guardianless Baha'is. We are the Baha'is with a living guardian. That guardian is departed, but he is still living. In fact, the next life, eternal life, is much more real, much more important than the world that we experience here on the physical plane. Just as the world that we experience here is much more real than the world we had experienced in the womb. Each stage of existence gives increasing amounts of understanding and abilities to perceive. So Shoghi Effendi, as the guardian of the cause of God, no matter the fact that he is departed physically, he is no longer a resident of the physical world, is still the guardian of the cause of God. And I see no reason to question that or to see it in any other way. In other words, the World Order of Baha'u'llah is not divorced from the guardianship, just as the World Order of Baha'u'llah is not divorced from the Universal House of Justice. Those twin institutions exist with us. They are a part of the cause of God. They are a part of the Baha'i faith. And so imagining a Baha'i faith without the guardianship is, to me, an impossibility. The guardianship is one of the major pillars which supports the existence of the World Order of Baha'u'llah, which is precisely, to my understanding, what Shoghi Effendi wrote in that passage I read before. The guardianship and the universal house of justice exist together in perfect alignment. Shoghi Effendi is both the guardian and the head of the House of Justice. That has not changed. When the first Universal House of Justice was elected in 1963, following a meeting by the Hands of the Cause in the Holy Land, in which they agreed to that timeline. Since that time, there have been two institutions in the Baha'i world, two functioning institutions: the Universal House of Justice and the Guardianship. I have had conversations in the past with some Baha'is who have said to me that, to their understanding, the guardianship exists in the books, the letters he wrote, and the letters written on his behalf. To me, and again, this is only my understanding, and I am not putting anyone down or rejecting the possibility that their understandings may be correct. That is like saying that Baha'u'llah exists in his writings, or Abdu'l-Baha exists in his own writings. We know that we can pray to Baha'u'llah, that Baha'u'llah is always with us. We can pray to Abdu'l-Baha. We can pray to Shoghi Effendi. I personally pray on a regular basis to the Universal House of Justice as well. I pray to my relatives. I pray to others. They are beings or institutions. They are real. Shoghi Effendi is real. He did not lose that reality when he died and passed on to the world to come. And so, as I see it, we will have a guardianship for as long as God desires it. Perhaps some future prophet may say that the guardianship has ended and now the guardian has been given a rest or something. I have no idea. I just made that up. But we have not yet heard that. We have the statements by Abdu'l-Baha in his Will and Testament, and we have the statement of Shoghi Effendi in the World Order of Baha'u'llah. And both of those statements anticipate, indeed promise, a continual living guardianship. But living, what is living? Is living only living here? Or is living also living in the world to come? I would say living in the world to come. And so I don't know this. This is pure speculation on my part. But I would imagine that when the members of the House of Justice are consulting with one another in Haifa or wherever they are meeting, that the guardian is present in some form amongst them. Now, the guardian is not in physical form, so he is not able to offer interpretations, which is why the House of Justice has said that it cannot present interpretations of certain things or reinterpret things that were already interpreted by Shoghi Effendi. Nevertheless, Shoghi Effendi is the interpreter. That is a part of his station. Now, exactly what that means in the context of the present, I don't know. But I assume that his interpretations continue to be made. And they have some effect on the world. What that effect is, I don't know. Perhaps they have some effect on the consultations of the House of Justice. Again, I don't know. Please bear in mind again that I am only speculating. I have no way of being sure that anything I am saying is true. My main point in making this podcast is to do two things. First, to debunk the statement that the Baha'i faith is the guardianless Baha'i faith. And second, as a possible reassurance to some Baha'is I have talked with at various times who have found the fact that the guardian passed without leaving a successor, and then reading that statement written by Shoghi Effendi on the necessity of a continuing guardianship. That is the reason why I have made this episode of the podcast. Again, maybe what I'm saying is wrong. I fully admit that. Maybe what I'm saying is even sacrilegious. I hope not. But what I am saying is offered with sincerity, that I can tell you that I do believe that the guardian is still with me. I feel him with me when I am praying. And so I know in my own life, in my own experiences, that the guardianship remains with me. And it is not a book. It is not a tablet or a letter written by Shoghi Effendi or written by one of his secretaries. It is a genuine experience that I think I have with him, much as I can commune with Abdul Baha, with Baha'u'llah, with the Bab, and other glorious beings who have existed throughout time. So I hope that this episode of my podcast has been somewhat beneficial to some people. If not, so be it. But my intention, again, is to try to help people who might need help, because I have met people who literally were on the verge, at least when I spoke with them, of leaving the Baha'i faith because they could not reconcile that passage I read with the fact that there is no guardian on the earth. The problem is, at the time when they discussed the subject with me, I had not yet arrived at this understanding. And I wish I would have, but I did not. We all grow at a pace determined by God's will. So I did not share this with them. I hope that they worked it out for themselves, or perhaps that someone else might have shared this or another understanding with them, which reassured them. I must say that I doubt that I am the only Baha'i on the face of the earth who has ever considered what I said. I am much too menial to think of myself as having that kind of function. All I can do is try to present things through my own eyes and hope that they will be beneficial through the eyes of others. For the time being, this has been Mark, by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.